Hi, I'm Lucinda Laughlin. Welcome to Auburn Community Television and this episode of Meet the Artist. Today our guest is Joyce Williams. Joyce is a pastel painter, and I am absolutely thrilled to have her here because I too am a pastel painter. But she has a totally different technique, and I'm going to learn a lot from her today. Welcome, Joyce. I'm so glad you could join us.
Nice to be here, Lucinda.
Well, let's start out. So I think we're kindred spirits here because we both love pastels.
Love it.
So how did you end up with pastels?
Well, I did watercolor for years and years, some oils, and as luck would have it, I took a class with Rafe Erickson and beginning pastel, and it turned me on to pastel, and that's just about all I do anymore. I just love it. It's so forgiving, and it's all those beautiful colors. You don't have to mix them on a palette. It's wonderful.
And your paints
I'm excited about it.
Your paints don't dry out?
Don't dry out. You can leave a painting and go back to it a week later or a year later.
Did you find any differences in how you were painting when you were doing watercolor and when you transitioned into pastels?
Big differences, yes, big differences, because you're using a dry medium, and so you don't have that fusing like you do in watercolor, and I missed that for a while, but you can kind of get that with pastel if you layer carefully.
Now, when you're talking about the layering, and because I too do layering, do you do the layering process before you go on to the paper that you're using, or is it during some process before that point?
No, it's during.
It's during.
I usually start out with the harder pastel and then work towards the soft, because the soft lays more on the paper, and I use sanded paper for the most part. Sometimes Canson Michance paper, which is very nice. A lot of artists use it. The sanded grips the pastel.
Well, you know, I'm going to back us up a little bit because we've talked the same talk, but I don't think our audience is going to understand pastels.
Okay.
So let's back up a little bit and talk
All right.
about pastels. What are pastels?
They're pigment, pure pigment, and they're bound with some kind of a binder to keep it in a stick form or a pan form. They've made those now. And it lasts forever and ever, which a lot of people don't know, and they expect it to go away in a few years, but it doesn't. It's there. And it can smear, but as long as it's well cared for, it's there for as long as you'll ever need it.
Now, it comes in these crayons or these sticks.
Mm-hmm.
I also understand you can get it loose in like a little canister of
Yes.
it.
Mm-hmm.
And have you used both the crayon or the stick and the looser material?
Yes.
But you have a
prefer the
preference.
sticks.
And why is it that you think you have that preference?
I guess it's the way I apply it. I like to actually stroke the stick on the paper and not have to use an implement. I use my fingers a lot, especially when I'm finishing up and I'm blending. I use my fingers softly. I don't rub. And so I just prefer the sticks, maybe because I'm more used to them.
Now, when you're doing the application onto the paper, so you're doing direct onto the paper,
Mm-hmm.
and this is where our techniques are different because I don't ever have the pastel direct to the paper. I grind it down and then take it up to the paper.
Yes.
So you're actually applying it directly to that. Now, do you ever have a problem with the residue that comes from when you're applying that onto your paper?
Mm-hmm. It always occurs. And if you turn your paper over, get it off your easel and bang it on the back, it'll shake whatever is loose off of it. I don't have a problem with it.
So your studio floor must be...
Yeah.
We could create a painting just from that.
Well, you're supposed to take it outdoors and do it, and I'm guilty of blowing it sometimes too, which I try not to do. It's not good for you.
And I actually thank you because you cautioned me about that because I'm continually blowing that residue away.
Take it outside.
And and you reminded me that the pigments are toxic.
Yes,
So when I'm exhaling, I'm going to be also inhaling what I'm breathing.
Right.
So I do thank you very much for that little tidbit of information.
Well, good. Let's keep you healthy.
Well, I hope so. And now I just have to break that habit.
Right.
So now you have done a wide range of types of pastels, because you do the landscapes, you also do the portrait work, and you also do still lifes. Is there one that you have a favorite?
Portraits.
And what is it, do you think about portraits that captures you?
I don't know. I like trying to capture the spirit and that the soul of the person in the painting, and have people come in and say, "Oh my gosh, that's really him,"
Yeah.
or "It's really her." I expect her to talk any minute. It's thrilling to create a likeness of someone that people know, recognize.
Now, do you ever find that sometimes what you realize is the specific characteristic that makes this particular person that person that you're capturing may not necessarily be the characteristic that they find appealing?
Yes. Yes, many times, because people see themselves in a mirror, which is also backwards or opposite. And they really don't see themselves as we see them. And also, if their nose is a little large, I have to paint it that way. I try to flatter them maybe a little bit, especially women, but if they have a nice long nose, that's part of them. And I try to include it.
Well, I think that when you bring in those lines and just all of that character in the face, that's really makes that particular pastel.
It does.
And that's one of the things that's nice about pastel too, because you can capture all of those, for lack, I hate to say lines in a face, but the character of that face.
Exactly.
You know what captures me, reason I love doing portrait work, are the eyes. I just love doing eyes.
I do too, yeah.
And
that's where the life, the sparkle is.
Now, when you start doing your portrait work, do you often start with the eyes, or how do you start out?
I do a sketch of the shape of the head, the tilt of the head, and then I place a line where the eyes would be, the nose would be, and the mouth would be. And I start there, and then, as I tell my students, a silly millimeter makes a big difference in a portrait. So if the lips look too thin, go millimeter at a time to thicken them, because it's not a great deal. Sometimes it's just a tiny hairline's difference, and it will make all the difference in the world in the likeness. Lines, I think, show character, so I show lines in my portraits.
Well, I find too that the eyes being so crucial is the spacing of the eyes and the tilt on the eyes. So drawing that line, as you're saying, helps get that so that they're right where they're supposed to be.
Right.
I have been so exasperated. Sometimes I'll be painting an eye, get it all finished, it's absolutely perfect, and then I realize that, as you say, it's a millimeter off, and you realize, oh my gosh, that eye has to be moved.
And I go back and forth from eye to eye. That way I don't get so involved in one eye, and then I can't get the other one the way I want it. So I try and do them both simultaneously, back and forth, so that they match, so to speak.
Well, since we're talking about portraits, let's look at some of the portraits that you have done today. We have two that are on the back wall. One is a cowboy, and so we'll talk about him first, because the other one is a character, I say character, a man that we all know, and we can talk about him second. So tell me about the cowboy that you have that is behind you.
Well, he's wearing a cowboy hat, but he's actually on a boat in Mexico whale watching.
So not at all what you would
mystery.
expect.
And he's one of my artist friends. It's her brother. And so I've done a couple of paintings of him. And she did one, and he has that one, I believe. And the other one of John he's a local Newcastle, Auburn character. And everybody recognizes him when they come into my studio. They say, "Oh, that's John." And I go, "Yeah, that's old John."
Now, what I love about, on the cowboy, is just the texture that you've been able to achieve with the hat is just absolutely amazing. And I also love that where you have the hat and you have actually the light that's coming through it. How did you achieve that when you're working with the pastels?
Just with the light coming through, just a lighter spot of a light pastel. I rarely use white except as an accent. So it's probably kind of a pale cream color.
Now, my understanding is that this particular painting too, you started with the bluish that's the color of the paper.
Mm-hmm.
And so that actually adds to how the portraits just really stand out because you have that paper.
And you choose your paper color to kind of, at least I do, to make the background if I want to leave it or just leave parts of it out, not put any pastel over it. I can do that with the colored.
Now, does the paper have a texture to it?
Yes.
And is that so it grabs that
This
pastel?
happens to be Canson. I think that one is on Canson, and so is the one of John. They're not sanded papers. The others, I've been using more sanded papers lately because it grips the
Even more
pastel.
so. I think we're always looking for something that's going to grab onto that pastel. Now, when you're working with the paper that you have your Cowboy on, is it have the consistency on like a peach? Is that kind of the fuzz? Would you describe it as that way?
It's more
or?
than that. It's
Okay.
more like a smooth orange peel. It's not
Okay.
as rough as an orange, but kind of that.
And what about the thickness of the paper? Do you find that that affects how the painting comes out?
Not so much as how the ease of working on it, I believe. You can do more with thicker paper. It takes more abuse. The sanded paper is more card-like, more like a thin card paper. So it has more body than the Canson Michien's paper. They're both good, but I prefer the sanded.
Now, the sanded, is it literally feel like sand when you would touch it?
And they have different grits, especially UArt you can get from, I think, 800 down to 300. And 800 is the smoothest. It's wonderful for portraits
Okay.
because you can, especially doing a baby or a child, you can get that smooth look with it. And then the 500 or the 600, which I probably use mostly, is wonderful for landscapes.
All right, so also then the skin tones that you have, because we have two very different skin tones in both of these pastel portraits you've done. One is a more reddish to it. It's not like when we went to school where they just said, get your flesh color and here it is.
Right.
So tell me a little bit about the different colors that you use to achieve these skin tones.
Basically, I use a creamy tan color and then go lighter and darker, depending on. I use a lot of purple in the shadows because it's a cool purple, and I use what amounts to like a cadmium red for the accents, like on the Cowboy, you call him. His face, I used a bright red, but very lightly, softly mixed, blended over the skin color. Because
Now,
he's out in the sun.
what I found surprising is you actually, I've used greens or grays to bring out the skin tone. It's pretty remarkable the different colors that we have in our skin.
Yes, it is. And it reflects, too, whatever we're wearing, to some extent.
Yes.
So
Now, also with this, what do we call our man here?
Jolly John.
Jolly John. I also love, again, the texture that you've been able to achieve on that hat. Because you can almost feel, you reach up and say, oh, I can tell that that's a cloth. And
that's just the paper.
Okay.
The texture of the paper coming through. I just lightly went over with the color of the hat and let that texture come through. And I did it on a burgundy paper so that it's a dark texture underneath.
Okay. Well, we have a few, we're going to go through pretty quickly here because you are also going to give us a demo today, but I want to get through some of the other things that you brought. You do stills, and I think you have one of your stills that's down there beside you. It's your cups. Let's put it right in front of here. And I love, again, the way that you have been able to pick up almost the shine of the porcelain from the cups that you have here. And is this through just a blending with your fingers that you're able to achieve this? It's the colors, or?
All of the above, I guess. I did blend them with my fingers slightly, just slightly. And this is also on Canson paper, burgundy. A rancher friend, had this collection of cups, and so I just piled them up, and I wanted them to be off balance so that they looked like they would topple at any minute, which gives the painting a kind of an edge. And then I looked at it for a while, put it away, brought it out again, and I thought, no, it needs a hand that's just maybe going to tip everything over. You know, don't quite know. And that's the story.
Well, that's always interesting about the various paintings that I love looking at, is because of that unknown that the viewer can actually bring to the piece. Mm-hmm. You have another still that is behind us, which is peaches and vegetables.
I call that one mixed bag. And it sort of happened. I bought some fruit at the Newcastle produce store, which is right across from the studio, and in the bag, and I tore it open, and they sort of fell out, and I thought, gosh, that would make a fun painting. And so I did it, and it came out so well, and it was well received, and it was accepted into Pastels USA, which is a very prestigious show. And so I was very happy with it. I'm still happy with it. I like to look at it.
I love the way you captured the paper from the bag that it's carried in.
That was difficult. That was more difficult than doing the fruit.
It always is surprising. A thing that you would think would be the simplest end up being the most difficult.
It was hard for me, but I want to do it again.
Don't you find it's a problem-solving practice that you go through, that you want to do this, get it from here to the paper?
And you think you have, it's just so exciting. You think, yeah, I did get it the way I wanted it.
Now, you've brought another piece today that is also been selected for a very prestigious show. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's this one here.
One too. Same show, same year.
Mm-hmm. And tell me a little bit about this, because this is absolutely beautiful, the way you've captured the water here.
Thank you. Well, we were up at Shoshone Falls in Idaho, Twin Falls, Idaho, and I thought we were going to a waterfall. Well, it's a series of falls, and it's almost like the one in New York, the falls.
Niagara?
Niagara, yes. And it's so big and so powerful, and it comes down and forms pools, and then it comes down some more, forms pools. And I took these photographs of the whole thing, and I thought, no, it's just too much information in there. So I zoned in on a little small area of it, and I thought, I'll just get where it's hitting that first pool there. And it worked.
Well, there are multiple layers or colors within this too. Again, water isn't just blue
and white.
And not just
Very
white.
little white in it.
So I see almost teals and purples and peach colors in here.
In the actual photo, there was a rainbow, and I thought the rainbow would look a little kitschy. So I took the rainbow out, but I did put a lot of the color in there.
Well, you've captured that. I think we could envision that the rainbow is there.
It was.
So you're going to give us a demonstration today, and one of the things that I asked you to do was to actually show us how you do the beards, because that is a real skill in and of itself, is to get all that hair, get the multiple layerings in it. So if you would show us how you go about doing that.
Be happy to. Have a sip of water first.
Absolutely.
Okay. This is a portrait of an old friend of mine, Vlad. He's 97 years old this month, so I'll probably give this to him. I've given him some other portraits that I've done of him. He's a good model. So I'm going to start here with a hard pastel, new pastel, and get the beard sort of started here using the side.
Now, do you typically use the side like that, or do you use the tip ever?
Oh, yeah. Both ways. Any way you can make it work.
Now, before you started putting this on, you had already kind of put the coloring of his face in. And
Right, I started that yesterday. It's just really a quick sketch. Very little detail, just I wanted to get something to work on. Okay.
And I notice you're working from a photograph. Do you largely use photographs when you're doing your work?
Yes, it's hard to get someone to sit, in that position for a long time. So I take photographs myself any time I can. And then I will smooth this a little bit with my fingers.
Now pastels are pretty dry. Does this dry out your hands because you're using your...
Yes, it does, but I use a lot of lotion.
Now also there's oils in your fingers, so you're somewhat
Not
introducing...
much anymore. Okay. So now we'll get some gray in there because there's a lot of shadow in this.
Now how many colors do you anticipate you'll be using in this beard?
As many as it takes.
Well, that's fair enough. And what is the color you're using on this one now?
It's just a very dark brown, but
Okay.
this is sanded paper and you can see how it textures nicely.
Now what if you make a mistake on here, or some, not, we're not going to say a mistake, it didn't come out exactly the way that you
make
wanted
plenty
it
of
to.
them.
Okay.
Then I take my handy dust off and I can blow it off. So I'm blowing off that whole edge there, and I can blow. You can clean up your edges. Any unwanted marks.
That's absolutely brilliant.
It is. When
I
I
did
discovered
go-
that, it was like, whoa.
I did go out and buy some because I decided, you know what, I'm going to try this.
Just wanted to warm this up with a warmer brown.
Now, do you ever find that you use something other than the pastel direct to the paper? Is it, and obviously you use your fingers to blend, but do you use anything else to do blending, or?
Usually my fingers. I've found they do it the best way. I get just the right amount of pressure. And sanded paper, if you do it too much, you end up with no skin on your fingers, which isn't a good thing. And I've done that, doing a large painting, and I'm smoothing here and smoothing there. I don't even realize it, and then I wash my hands and I got too raw.
Oh, wow.
Okay, and then I'm going to go in with a kind of a cream colored, do the highlights.
And this one you're using more of the edge than on the stick. Now, do you ever use what I call the stubs, which to help to kind of do your lines, or do you use anything like that?
Once in a while, if I have to get into a little tiny area that my finger won't fit into. Yeah.
Now, you're going to be in the upcoming Placer Art Studio Tour.
Right.
And are you doing anything in particular, getting ready for that?
Well, our whole studio, Newcastle Arts Gallery and Studios, most of us are in it. I think there's 6 of us that are actually going to be in the Placer Arts. And yes, we're getting ready. In fact, I got a new rug for my studio, because the other one was, you can imagine, pastel. Don't know how long this one will last, but so I changed everything around and made it look fresh.
Do you have any new pieces that you're going to be showing during the studio tour?
I'm working on a couple of them that I'm not really terribly pleased with yet, but you know how that goes. Sometimes you have to just leave them alone for a while, which I do.
Now, you indicated you're in a studio. Do you always go to that studio and that's where you do your work, or do you do any at home?
I have everything in the studio. I have a small house, and so I go in every day, except weekends. And see, I don't like that. It's too cool. Add some more brown.
I know I'm being a distraction to you.
No,
but-
it's okay.
All right.
I usually work pretty fast, so.
Now there's, not only are you at the packing house, the Newcastle packing house, but how many other artists are going to be there this year?
There are 11 of us in all, but a couple of the gals are going to be out of town. And so I think there'll be 6 of us actually involved in the tour. Now I go back.
All right,
with
I think we're going to actually
high
have to
pastel. Okay.
start.
One
stop
more
on this.
stroke?
Okay, one more stroke.
I would go back and define the beard a little more than that.
So it's so many different layers that you're putting in here, and obviously a lot of different colors that go into this, and it's amazing what you're then able to then create. How do you get the really, really, really fine lines that you're seeing though in that
With
beard?
the harder pastel.
Okay.
And I just use like the corner, because it has corners.
I
like
see.
the squares.
Okay.
And you can use that until it goes down, and then you can sharpen it on something and make it very sharp if you want, like the whole thing on sanded paper.
That's great. Well, why don't you come over, because we unfortunately are not going to be able to get to a lot of the
Sure.
stuff that you do, but why don't you tell our audience how they can see other work that you do, and then I'll also
Okay.
talk about a little bit how we can find you on the studio tour.
Okay. Okay. I have a studio at the Newcastle Packing Shed in Newcastle. It's one of the big old historical buildings there where they used to pack all the fruit and ship it all over the country. And we've turned it into most of it into this gallery and studios. And I have paintings hanging at City Hall right now in Auburn, and the Civic Center in Roseville. They'll be coming down shortly. And then I belong to Sierra Pastel Society and Plaster Arts and Plaster Arts Artists League, Newcastle Packing Shed Artists, and the shows. My art is usually in some show somewhere. It will be, I think, in embellishments on Lincoln Way for the Art Walk, and the art tour pictures will be in there.
Well, I'm actually going to issue a challenge to you. I'm going to call it a pastel challenge, and I'm going to select a photograph. I'm going to give one to you, and then I'm going to take that photograph, and I'm going to ask you in here another time, and we are going to both work on our different styles of how to do pastels.
I love it.
So I hope
Wonderful.
that you will come back.
I would love to.
And
Thank
I
you,
certainly
Lucinda.
hope, thank you, and I certainly hope that you will tune in for that particular challenge. So tune in to Auburn Community Television for another episode of Meet the Artist. Meet the Artist is supported by the North Auburn Artist, so that you can meet neighbors that may be artists or maybe find an artist within your community. I hope you will tune in again. Thank you.